And now moving on to the political arena, with all the last-minute shifting, changes, and campaigning, the lines between some of the parties can sometimes become more and more blurred, making the upcoming vote in September all the more difficult. Well, joining us in the studio to help clear things up, we have attorney, Israel activist, public diplomacy expert, and lecturer Bar-Yoshafat, and Zaki, founder of the Front for the Protection of Democracy. Thank you both so much for coming in today.
All right, so we're going to begin by talking a little bit about the differences in policy and ideology that we see between the rival parties, Likud and Blue and White, given that they, are polling with the most seats right now. What would you guys say?
Well, first, I think it's important to understand what does it mean right and left in Israel. In America, for instance, you have two questions. How much do you want the government in your pocket, and how much do you want the government in your values? If you say, I don't want the government in either, you're a libertarian. If you say, I want them in both, you're an authoritarian. If you say, I want the government in my pocket and not in my values, you're a Democrat. And if you say, I want the government in my values, not in my pocket, you're a Republican, in a nutshell. In Israel, it's different. In Israel, it's very, very different. We're a parliamentary system and not a presidential system. And we have three axes. One is security and diplomacy. The other is social and economic issues. And the third is a matter of identity, more Jewish or more democratic, which I don't really understand what it means. But anyways, these are the three axes. Likud doesn't have a platform right now, but they have an ideology. The ideology is very clear. They're tilted more to the hawkish side when it comes to security. They're more capitalistic, and they have a strong Jewish identity. Blue and White, on the other hand, I would argue they don't have a real ideology. Their ideology mainly is just not Netanyahu, because their number one and number two are against Jewish settlements. Number three is pro-Jewish settlements. Number five was the head of the Union of Israel. Number nine opposed unions all of his life. Number 1 and 2 want to change the nation-state law. Number 14 wrote the nation-state law. So it's a mishmash of different opinions.
All right. Uli?
I tend to agree with the latter part of what he said about Blue and White. Look, Blue and White is a phenomena of the fact that the real axis of Israeli politics, especially in the last, let's say, 5 years, Netanyahu has been in power for the last 10 years in a row, and he became the axis of Israeli politics. I don't think Likud has real ideology these days. Whatever Netanyahu says, that's the Likud ideology, and Netanyahu is flexible sometimes in his ideology, and Blue and White is a reaction to that. You cannot call them left. You have there, as was pointed out, folks who used to work for Netanyahu till recently, his spokesperson, his cabinet secretary, his minister of defense, from the Likud party. It's not an ideological party, nor is Likud. I mean, you have Yamina, perhaps, who's more right-wing ideology oriented. Likud is Netanyahu, and Blue and White is anti-Netanyahu. That's it.
So what I want to know then is, what do you think the biggest, because I think we touched on a few different topics that maybe Israeli voters are most concerned with, being, security and maybe foreign relations and things like that. What do you think is the absolute biggest concern to Israelis, and who do you think best represents or has the best ideology in that issue?
Honestly, I look, in the past, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the beginning of the last decade, elections were about security, and mostly security and the Israeli-Palestinian issue. That's the existential biggest issue for Israel. But it's not for Israelis at the moment. On the one hand, there's no violence, there's no anything that is pressuring. I mean, there is violence, and every now and then you have
Iran on the border.
Right, but it's not the main issue, because you have both. I mean, you have Netanyahu on the one hand, who says, I'm Mr. Security. You have ex-chief of, or three ex-chief of staff of the Israeli military. Sure. Again, it's about Netanyahu. Much like the United States, where now Trump became the axis, Netanyahu is the question.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure that Netanyahu is the only question. By the way, I have to say, I also think that one of the downsides of the right and the left, that no one is bringing someone that can really match up to him in his abilities, in my opinion. This is my opinion. But I think the election is, because we're a parliamentary system, is what kind of coalition can you create? And if it's Netanyahu who's the head of the coalition, there are greater chances, not necessarily, but there are greater chances that it'll be somewhat of a right-wing government. Whereas if Benny Gantz is the prime minister, it'll be center or center-left government. And I think that is something that people like to take into account when they're trying to think, who should I vote for? If it's not Netanyahu, is it going to be someone that can be a partner to Netanyahu?
All All right, so I'd like to talk about the chances of a unity government because that's obviously what is on everybody's minds right now. What do you guys think are the chances of having a unity government?
The reason we're discussing this is because of the wild card of Israeli politics, and that's Avigdor Lieberman. Lieberman, historically, naturally, is a right-winger. He was supposed to be part of the Netanyahu bloc. But Lieberman, from his reasons that are not clear, decided to wear a new suit where he says, I am no longer or I will prevent, if I have the power, I will prevent any government that will include the Haredi parties. Now, the ultra-Orthodox party, the Haredi parties, mind you, Lieberman himself was a partner with Haredi parties, both on the local and on the national level.
Right.
That doesn't matter. This guy reinvented himself several times in the last 2 decades. Now he's the wild card because he did not join the Netanyahu bloc in the elections in April. Netanyahu is now not the re-elected prime minister, and according to the polls, there's neither of the blocs, Gantz's bloc or Netanyahu bloc, doesn't have a majority, which means that Lieberman will actually, if the results will be like in the polls, there will be a national unity government with Lieberman as the axis there that makes it happen. And I should say, if it will be a unity government when Netanyahu is not leading, most likely Netanyahu would not be the prime minister.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we don't have any more time to hear your thoughts on this.
I'm sorry.
But we will see what happens. We only have a couple of weeks left until the elections, all right?
Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.